You get mixed up and you got to keep moving forward. But one thing, I woke up this morning feeling all right again, but it's like my nose. I don't you get up here and you start talking, your nose, your body, it just feels like. So just pray that I can get the words out. And I don't sound like I'm mumbling to you, because you'd be like, what is wrong? But when your nose drains, it feels like it drains, and it's stuck. So I'm gonna pray again, just because I like to pray. Number one, but I'm gonna pray I can get through it. So would you just pray with me again? Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be ever so pleasing and acceptable, because, Lord, you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Well, this morning, we are finishing up a series that we entitled The Parables of Jesus. And in the last few weeks, we talked about some of his truths that he shared about God and his kingdom, and desires us to have as his people. And they're simple, yet they're powerful stories. And we've talked a lot, and I've talked to many of you guys. I love parables, because parables are stories, and stories that we can share, and stories that people can somewhat always relate to and understand. So I love to share parables. Or, as I preach, I love to share illustrations, because I think it brings it together. But these truths and these stories are powerful. They show meaning to the lives of many, to live out the love, grace, and mercy of God in everyday lives. So we began this series many years, and if you have been here and haven't, they're all on our YouTube channel and or our Facebook page. So you can go back and you can rewatch them. I'd rather you can watch them there, because then you can't throw things at me if I did something wrong. You can just turn it off and no. But again, we talked about the Good Samaritan, where Jesus challenged us to redefine who our neighbors are, and love it with a radical compassion, because we talk about here at Morristown Methodist Church, we want to connect the community to Jesus. So how can we do so? How do we show that? And that is like the Good Samaritan. It was not merely about doing good deeds, but about embodying a love that crosses boundaries, reaching out to those in need, even when it is inconvenient or costly. And then last Sunday, we talked about the parable of the prodigal son. And that vivid depiction of God's incredible grace, where we were reminded in this, that no matter how far we stray or how lost we feel, God's mercy extends beyond our failures. His arms are always open wide, welcoming us back with joy, forgiveness, and restoration. So today, as we close this series, we're going to turn our attention to the parable of the talents. And see, this parable goes beyond marital wealth. It speaks to the heart of stewardship. It challenges us to consider how we use what God has entrusted to us, our gifts, time, opportunities, and resources. And I think the question before us is, how faithful are we in using these blessings to further God's kingdom and serve others? So as we dive into the story, I invite you to reflect on how God has blessed you, and consider how he is calling you to use those blessings for his glory. So let's open this morning together in Matthew 25, 14 through 30. It says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them. While he was gone, he gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last. Dividing it in proportion to their abilities, he then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver was also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, the master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you have given me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master said, Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least it could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who don't do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I think as I read that, and I don't know where if you ever read it and circle it, I look at it and I circle and I check things on it, and I think there's a couple lessons. I think 3 that I have in this passage of looking at. And the first is that God entrusts us with his gifts. In the parable, the master entrusts his servants. He entrusts his servants with different amount of talents, or silver, as we read, in according to their abilities. Each talent represents a significant trust. And I know when you think about, that, to us, the silver today, what does that cost? Well, in that time, that enormous sum was equivalent to about 20 years worth of wages for a laborer. But today's talents extend beyond financial resources. I think we get stuck there sometimes when we talk about this. And they encompass our time, abilities, spiritual gifts, and opportunities. Each of us is blessed differently. Each one of us in this room today and those watching, we're blessed differently. And I've told you many times, if I was the same as one of you in the room, we'd either get in a fight, or it would just. God created each one of us with these abilities and differently. And the thing is the key isn't how much we have, but how we use it, right? The abilities we have, the resource we have, how do we use it for our best ability? And see, I think God expects us to be good stewards, whatever he's given us faithfully. What does it look like? So are we using what God has placed in our hands? Are we using the things that God has placed in our hands in front of us? Just as a parent giving an allowance to teach a responsibility that here in a minute we'll talk about, God uses it to intimately and entrusts us according to our faithfulness. You see, when I say imagine that, right? Many of you in the room are parents, have been parents, your grandparents. And I know at some point as a father, my kids are not at that age ultimately yet. Evan's getting there. He'll be 9 next Saturday. It's weird to think I have a 9-year-old next Saturday. Because just yesterday I felt like I was bringing him home. But you got those little kids as they grow up. And some of you in the room as parents, you give your kids allowance when they do their chores. And a lot of times those chores are thoughtfully considered through the level of maturity. Like as they grow, okay, we're going to give them to do the dishes, and we're going to have them go do maybe mow the grass, or pick up. You have all tasks for your kids. But then think about it. I think about it because my three. I just think about my three here. Evan's going to save his money differently than Jackson or Iris. Evan may invest his money because he's a little older to help, someone in need maybe, or maybe one of my little ones is like, man, Dad, I want this, so I'm just gonna go out, spend the money, spend it, and maybe they don't realize the value. But what that does is, it's the goal of us as parents. The goal of us is really to do what? To provide the money? No. It's to teach our children how to manage what they have with the wisdom and care. So it's not for me to get mad at my kid if they spent the money the way they did, but it's also I might get mad. Like, why are you spending it the way you're spending it? Because in the same way, God, our loving Father, intimately understands each of us. Like I've said, He knows us. He cares. He sees our strength. He sees our weakness. He sees our potential. Again, how do we use it? So again, regardless of the opportunities we have, what truly counts is our response to what He's placed in our hands. Are we using our time, talents, and resources for His glory? Are we faithfully stewards, investing in what matters to God, or are we letting His gifts go to waste? Ultimately, it's our faith, not the amount we have been given, that will be celebrated and rewarded by God. And then there's this idea of faithfulness requires action. Again, think about the first two there. They took immediate action and actively seeking ways to increase what had been entrusted to them. They demonstrated diligence and trust. In contrast, the third servant buried his talent in the ground. You see, faithfulness requires action. God expects us to use our gifts to advance His kingdom. And yet we see that the third servant didn't do so. It's not for losing it, but it's because he did nothing with it. So again, when we ask of something, we want an action. An action means going to do it. An action for our church is connecting our community to Jesus. How are we doing so? We got Halloween. We've got turkey and noodle. That the actions that we have also play a role in what we're doing. And see, I don't think God's saying we have to be perfect at it. We've got to have our ducks in a row, because obviously Sunday morning sometimes we're a little off, or Wednesday. But He's not asking for that perfection. Like, I think too many times we get into it, it's got to be so perfect. We want it this way, and when we don't, it starts to eat us alive. But He's like, no, I don't need the perfection. I need the participation. He wants the participation. He desires us to step out of faith and trusting Him to work through our efforts. I think about, those in here, to me, I use this analogy today about a piano. Many of you know in here, when we moved here, we ended up bringing a piano in our home. Well, none of us play a piano in my house. They're beautiful. They're elegant. Yet we bring a piano in our house, and at least if I don't play it, what happens to my piano? It loses tuning. It gets dusty. It just looks like a big piece of decoration, or just a paperweight sometimes, right? But we do, right? It's untouched. It's collecting. It fails its purpose of why it's there. It's designed to bring joy and enhance lives. The piano can only create beautiful music if it started to be played. Now, I'm not saying my family isn't trying to play, because we got a book there that we go through, and I think little Iris thinks she's a star at it anyways, because that little girl, I think, oh man, it's like her screaming, it's loud. But see, again, as the notes are played, the melody's going, we can see the beauty of the melody. And I think when we think about God, when we are entrusted each other of our unique gifts that we have and opportunities, we all again have a gift and an opportunity. It's a blessing. I mean, when these gifts are not meant though to be hidden, right? They're not meant to. I mean, each one, like if I said, hey, we want the piano played, but we're gonna let it sit there, but we've got two amazing pianists in our church and they can play it. It's not being used. What's it for then? And, what are we using it for? There's the blessed in it of using it, right? But see, something I think too, though, God does, and some of us have an ability and a blessing inside of us that we haven't used, or we haven't reached, or we haven't tapped into because we're fearing it. We're fearing that we can't do it, right? We fear that we don't have the abilities. Because most our gifts aren't to be hidden out of fear or doubt. One of my fears was, honestly, as a person, was to stand up in front of people and to share about Jesus to people. Because my fear and my doubt is I'm young, I'm dumb, I can't, but that's not truth, obviously. But I also felt like I also don't want to steer people in the wrong direction. I don't want to. My fear and doubt crept in. But it was somebody that I knew who said, hey, I think you can do it. It was almost like they gave me that nudge, right? That nudge, you can do it, and as I said, okay, I can do it. It's like, it's a risk. There's either, the risk is either they're going to look at me and they're going to say something to me. They're going to, there's all things that, in my mind was saying, but it was that risk that I took and my feeling that risk led to glory. It led to his glory, because I spent more time in the Word. I spent more time studying. I spent more time, trying to focus on what God has called in my life. That's like each one of us. We have that same, situations in our life. It may not be in ministry. It may be in where you're at vocationally or what you're doing. You got, or maybe it's even somebody in this room that's got a talent that you're just not letting go of. It's still being hidden. It's not in front. Because what happens is when we trust God and allow him to use our talents, they may, again, it may not be perfect, but yet we're going to learn. We're going to grow. We're going to allow the Holy Spirit to work through us. But again, that piano is not going to be, that's not going to produce concert level performance right away. Like I said, so whatever that in you is, it may not be, even me as a preacher, I may not be where I'm supposed to be yet because, I'm still refining. But it's the people around me, again, like I said, that are helping me redefine where I'm at, how to do things. Because in essence, he's going to make it something more beautiful and its impact, not just our lives, but the people around us. So the third point that comes today is the accountability and reward. I mean, when the master returns, he calls his servants to account for what they've done. First two servants received joy and praise, not merely for doubling their talents, but for the act of faith and responsibility. I mean, the third servant, however, faced rebuke. He buried it. He got told that he wasn't using it right, and I think we also, as individuals and as a church and leaders, we're held to accountability for how we use God's gifts, whether we invest them or bury them or however it is. If they stay in the bank and they just sit there. But God expects faithfulness, not perfection. Those who will use what he's given for his glory, the principle is clearly, as we step out in trust, he will not only bless others, he won't bless others, but also experience, not only bless others, but also experience, the joy of good. Now, another illustration that I think, and I don't know if it's truth, but I think it could be truth, I guess. There's a renowned farmer that he shared his best seeds with his neighbors. Many found that strange, questioning why he would give away his finest seeds instead of keeping them for himself to grow superior crops. When asked about his generosity, the farmer simply replied this. He said, "The wind carries pollen from everyone's field into my own. For my neighbors grow inferior crops, it will affect the quality of my harvest. By helping them succeed, I'm ensuring that the success of my own fields." I don't know. I'm not a farmer, so but the farmer understood a powerful truth. Generosity not only blesses others, but also creates a ripple effect that benefits us. His willingness to share ensured not just a fruitful harvest for his neighbors, but also for himself. So in the same way, God rewards our faithfulness when we use the gifts, talents, and resources he has entrusted to us. Not hoarding them by investing them but by investing in his kingdom. Not investing in our own, but in his kingdom. We bless those around us and experience God's joy and favor. His pleasure is our faithfulness isn't just a distant future reward. It's something we can experience now. And as we step out in faith, using whatever we've been given for his glory, we see the fruit of our efforts in the lives we touch in the growth of his kingdom. But however, like the farmer who understood the consequence of neglecting to share, we too face repercussion when we fail to use the gifts God has given us. If we bury our talents or misuse them, we hinder both the blessing that could flow through us and the joy that comes from serving God faithfully. God calls us to use what he has entrusted to us, not just for our benefit, but for a greater kingdom mindset as we're trying to connect our community to Jesus. In doing so, we ensure a rich harvest for others and fill our own lives with his joy and blessings, both now and for eternity. So as we shift and move this morning, as we shift and move to a time of communion, I think the Parable of Talent challenges us to reflect deeply on how we live as stewards of many gifts God has given us. Whether it's our time, abilities, resources, and spiritual gifts, God calls us to use them for his glory, to advance his kingdom. Faithfulness means taking action, stepping out and trusting and multiplying what he has entrusted us. When we invest in God's kingdom in the lives of others, we find true joy and fulfillment. I think that's where I think of today as we come to the table, the communion that's been prepared before us. We are reminded of the greatest gift God has given us, the gift of his Son, Jesus Christ. Jesus gave his very life for us, demonstrated perfect faithfulness to his Father's will. So as we partake of the bread and the cup, let us consider how we can faithfully live out the calling God has placed or called in our lives, remembering the ultimate sacrifice made for us. Let us be faithful stewards of what God has entrusted to us. May we use our gifts not for our own benefit, but for the greater good of his kingdom. In doing so, we ensure that our lives would be filled with his joy and blessings, both now and eternity.